Emily Carter, a mother trapped in a millionaire's mansion, risked everything to escape with her son. Little did she know her courage would uncover dark secrets and inspire a story of freedom and resilience. Before we dive into the story, let's do what Sleepless in Seattle taught us. Share where you're listening from. Comment below. Sunlight streams through towering windows, casting long shadows across imported marble floors, but Emily Carter feels the warmth stop at her skin. She stands in the grand living room of her mansion, surrounded by carefully curated artwork and antique furniture that speaks of old money and refined taste. None of it belongs to her. Not really. Even the air feels borrowed, measured out in careful doses by the central heating system that Daniel insists on keeping at exactly 72 degrees. Her gaze drifts to the blank canvas propped in the corner of her private sitting room. It's been there for 3 weeks, untouched, a gift from Daniel that somehow feels more like a taunt than a kindness. "You've been looking stressed lately, darling," he'd said, placing it there with the precise attention he gives to all his calculated gestures. "Perhaps returning to your little hobby would help." Little hobby. The words echo in her mind as she approaches the canvas, fingers hovering over its pristine surface. Before Daniel, before this gilded cage of a life, she'd been halfway through her MFA. Her professors had praised her potential, spoken of gallery showings and artistic voice. Now her voice feels trapped somewhere beneath her sternum, compressed by the weight of expectations and the constant subtle corrections to her behavior. The baby monitor crackles with the first hints of her son's stirring. Emily's hand drops from the canvas as Margaret, the nanny, murmurs soothing words upstairs. Even this most basic maternal duty has been outsourced, packaged, and scheduled according to Daniel's exacting standards. "Mrs. Carter?" Emily turns to find Sophie, one of the maids, hovering in the doorway. The young woman's posture is perfect, her uniform pressed to knife-edge precision. They're all like this, the staff, polished and distant, treating Emily with a careful deference that feels more isolating than respectful. "Yes, Sophie?" "Mr. Carter asked me to remind you about the household expenses report." Sophie's eyes drift slightly to the side as she speaks, never quite meeting Emily's gaze. "He'd like it before dinner." Of course he would. Emily forces a smile. "Thank you, Sophie. I'll have it ready." The maid retreats with silent efficiency, leaving Emily alone with the weight of another subtle demand. She moves to her desk, a beautiful antique that Daniel selected, and opens her laptop. The expense tracking software he insisted she use glows on the screen, each category coded and subcategorized with mechanical precision. Footsteps in the hallway, measured and purposeful, announce Daniel's approach before he appears. Emily's shoulders tense involuntarily, but she keeps her expression neutral as he enters. He's impeccable as always in his tailored suit, not a dark hair out of place despite the late afternoon hour. "How are we doing with those expenses, darling?" His voice carries the smooth, practiced warmth he uses in board meetings. He places a hand on her shoulder, and Emily forces herself not to flinch at the familiar weight of it. "Almost finished," she says, scrolling through the categories. "Though I noticed the nursery renovation estimate came in higher than—" "Let's table that discussion for now." Daniel's fingers tighten slightly on her shoulder. "I've been thinking the current layout works perfectly well. No need to waste money on unnecessary changes, wouldn't you agree?" "It's not really a question," Emily nods, swallowing the suggestions she'd spent weeks researching. "Of course. Excellent." He releases her shoulder and checks his watch. "A Patek Philippe that cost more than a car. I have a late meeting. Don't wait up." Daniel's footsteps fade down the hallway, and Emily lets out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The house settles into its evening quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of staff preparing dinner she won't be sharing with her husband. When she's certain Daniel has left, Emily retrieves her sketchbook from its hiding place behind a loose panel in her closet. The pages are filled with quick studies: a bird in flight, a woman's face turned toward an unseen light, her son's sleeping profile. Small acts of defiance captured in charcoal and ink. The baby monitor comes to life with a cry, and Emily quickly returns the sketchbook to its hiding place. She heads upstairs, passing Margaret in the hallway. The nanny gives her a polite nod before disappearing into the staff quarters, leaving Emily alone with her son. In the nursery, she lifts him from his crib, breathing in the sweet baby scent of him. He settles against her shoulder, and for a moment, the weight of him feels like the only real thing in this carefully constructed world. Her phone buzzes with a text from Daniel. Close the Richardson deal. The board was impressed with my presentation on sustainable growth metrics. Emily reads the message twice, hearing it in Daniel's voice. The careful modulation of pride and false modesty he's perfected over years of climbing the corporate ladder. To the world, he's the perfect success story. Self-made millionaire, devoted husband, new father. They don't see the man who tracks his wife's expenses down to the penny, who dismisses her dreams as childish fancies, who measures love in terms of control and compliance. The baby squirms in her arms, and Emily realizes she's holding him too tightly. She loosens her grip, swaying gently as she hums a lullaby her mother used to sing. The melody feels like a small rebellion in this house where every sound is measured and approved. A knock at the door makes her jump. Sophie stands in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Carter called, ma'am. He wanted to remind you about tomorrow's dinner party. The guests will arrive at 7. "Thank you, Sophie." Emily keeps her voice steady, though her heart races at the reminder. Another evening of perfect smiles and careful conversation, of watching Daniel charm their guests while subtly correcting her every minor misstep. After Sophie leaves, Emily continues rocking her son, watching shadows lengthen across the nursery's pale blue walls. Soon she'll need to review the dinner party arrangements, double-check the menu, ensure everything meets Daniel's exacting standards. But for now, she allows herself this moment of peace, this small pocket of authenticity in her carefully scripted life. Her son's breathing eventually steadies into sleep, but Emily keeps holding him, reluctant to break this connection. In these quiet moments, she can almost forget the weight of Daniel's expectations, the constant pressure to be the perfect wife in his perfect world. Almost. She places the baby gently in his crib, her fingers lingering on his soft cheek. Something fierce and protective wells up in her chest as she watches him sleep. He deserves better than this, she thinks. Better than growing up in a house where love comes with conditions and freedom is just another word for a longer leash. The thought startles her with its clarity, its dangerous implications. Emily steps back from the crib, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusts the baby monitor. She can't afford to think like this, can't afford to question the careful boundaries of her world. But as she walks back to her room, past the blank canvas that mocks her abandoned dreams, Emily feels something shift inside her, a small crack in the foundation of her acceptance, letting in dangerous glimpses of what life could be beyond these gilded walls. Her phone buzzes again, another text from Daniel, this one about the expense report she still hasn't finished. Emily's fingers hover over the keyboard, ready to type another carefully worded response. But for the first time in years, she allows herself to imagine not responding at all. The thought terrifies her, but it also feels like taking a full breath after years of shallow ones. She puts the phone down without replying and moves to the window, watching the sun set over their manicured gardens. Tomorrow she'll be the perfect hostess at Daniel's dinner party. She'll smile and laugh at the right moments, wear the dress he picked out, keep her opinions safely tucked away. But tonight, in this moment between day and dusk, Emily lets herself feel the full weight of her discontent. It settles in her chest like a stone, heavy with the promise of change, or perhaps the threat of it. The baby monitor crackles softly, a reminder of what's at stake. Emily turns from the window, pressing her palms against her eyes until she sees stars. She has decisions to make, but not tonight. Tonight, she'll finish the expense report, prepare for tomorrow's dinner party, play her role in Daniel's perfect life. But the crack is there now, letting in questions she can't unknow and desires she can't unfeel. In the growing darkness of her room, Emily Carter begins to imagine a different kind of life, one where love doesn't feel like a beautifully decorated prison. The thought follows her into sleep, a dangerous lullaby of possibility. Dawn creeps into the bedroom, finding Emily already awake, her son's early feeding schedule more reliable than any alarm. She cradles him close as he takes his bottle, noting how Daniel's side of the bed remains untouched. Another late night at the office, another breakfast shared only with ghosts of conversations they'll never have. The staff moves through their morning routines with practiced efficiency. Emily watches Margaret take over baby duties, the nanny's competent hands making Emily's own efforts seem clumsy in comparison. She swallows the urge to assert herself, to claim this small piece of motherhood. Daniel has made it clear that their son's care should be left to professionals. The Hendersons will be joining Mr. Carter for dinner tonight, Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, reminds her. Shall I have the chef prepare Mr. Henderson's preferred whiskey salmon? Emily nods, mentally reviewing the endless list of preferences and protocols that govern these business dinners. Yes, and make sure we use the blue china. Mrs. Henderson mentioned last time how it brings out her eyes. The day unfolds in a series of carefully orchestrated movements. Emily supervises the flower arrangements, approves the menu, and selects the perfect wine pairings. Each decision feels like another brick in the wall between her true self and this polished persona she's expected to maintain. She attempts conversation with the new kitchen maid, asking about her family, but the girl's responses are stilted, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting Daniel to appear and reprimand this breach of hierarchy. Emily retreats to her sitting room, the failed interaction burning like acid in her throat. The dinner party proves to be another exercise in carefully managed appearances. Emily plays her part perfectly until she makes the mistake of commenting on one of Daniel's recent acquisitions. The merger with Tech Solutions should prove interesting, she says, drawing on the business degree she'd earned before marriage. Their AI development could revolutionize. Emily, Daniel interrupts, his laugh carrying a warning edge. I don't think we need to bore our guests with technical details. He turns to Mr. Henderson. Though I'd love to hear your thoughts on the market projections. The dismissal stings, but Emily maintains her smile, years of practice keeping it firmly in place. Later, after the guests leave, she slips into the nursery. Her son's peaceful breathing calms the tremors in her hands as she retrieves her sketchbook from its hiding place. The woman she draws tonight holds a lantern in a dark forest, her face turned toward an unseen path. Emily loses herself in the sweep of charcoal across paper, in this small act of defiance against Daniel's world of spreadsheets and profit margins. Days blur together, each one bringing fresh examples of Daniel's tightening control. He questions her choice of nanny schedule, suggesting she's neglecting their son's development. At another dinner party, he corrects her pronunciation of a wine varietal, his charm making the moment seem like playful banter, rather than the public humiliation it is. I worry about your attention to detail lately, he says one evening, scrolling through their shared calendar. The Blakemores mentioned you seemed distracted at lunch. Emily's hands clench beneath the table. I've had a lot on my mind. That's exactly my concern. Daniel's voice carries that familiar note of reasonable concern that makes her doubt her own perceptions. Perhaps we should discuss reducing your social obligations. Focus on what's truly important. The threat of further isolation hangs between them. Emily retreats to the nursery again, her sanctuary in this gilded prison. As she holds her sleeping son, his weight anchors her to reality, to the growing certainty that something must change. That night, Daniel's temper finally cracks its perfect veneer. During an argument about her excessive spending on baby clothes, he slams his crystal tumbler against the marble counter. Glass shatters, sending whiskey and shards spraying across the kitchen floor. Their son's startled cry pierces the sudden silence. Now look what you made me do, Daniel says, his voice deadly quiet. Clean this up before someone gets hurt. Emily's hands shake as she sweeps up the broken glass, but something else trembles too, a resolve she didn't know she possessed. Later, after Daniel leaves for another late meeting, she opens her laptop. The screen's glow illuminates her face as she types, "Women's shelters near me." The search results stare back at her, a lifeline and a judgment all at once. Emily's finger hovers over the trackpad, her heart pounding against her ribs. In the nursery, her son stirs and settles, his small sounds carrying through the baby monitor. If you ever think of leaving, Daniel's voice echoes in her memory, the threat crystallizing during their latest argument. Remember that I'll have sole custody before you reach the city limits. No judge will side with an unstable mother who abandons her child. The words should terrify her into submission. Instead, they ignite something fierce and protective in her chest. Emily begins to type again, this time with steady fingers, Custody rights, emotional abuse. This small act of rebellion feels like the first true breath she's taken in years. Tomorrow, she'll continue playing her part in Daniel's perfectly orchestrated life. But tonight, in the soft glow of her laptop screen, Emily Carter begins to plan her escape. Time slips away as she researches, each new tab opening doors she hadn't dared consider before. The words blur together: domestic violence, emotional abuse, custody rights, until Daniel's key in the lock sends her scrambling to clear her browser history. He finds her in their bedroom, already dressed for sleep. His cologne fills the air as he loosens his tie. The Williams contract is giving us trouble. His voice carries that familiar edge of contained fury. I don't need any distractions at home right now. Of course not, Emily murmurs, but something in her tone must betray her, because Daniel turns, his eyes sharp in the dim light. Let me be clear, he says, each word precise as a knife strike. If you're entertaining any foolish ideas about leaving, remember that no judge will give custody to a woman who abandons her child. I'll make sure of that. The threat hangs in the air between them. Emily forces herself to meet his gaze, to keep her voice steady. I would never leave our son. Good. Daniel's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Then we understand each other. Later, after his breathing evens into sleep, Emily slips from their bed. The nursery is quiet except for her son's soft breaths. She lifts him carefully, breathing in his sweet baby scent, and in that moment, her decision crystallizes like frost on glass. They can't stay. Every day in this house adds another crack to her soul, another shadow to her son's future. The thought of him growing up here, learning to walk on eggshells and measure love in terms of compliance, makes her physically ill. Emily spends the next hour gathering essentials with trembling hands. A small bag concealed in the back of her closet holds cash she's been squirreling away, a few crucial documents, her son's favorite blanket. Her fingers brush against her sketchbook, but she leaves it behind. Some sacrifices are necessary for survival. The grandfather clock in the hall strikes midnight as Emily makes her final preparations. She changes her son's diaper one last time, dresses him warmly, checks and double-checks her mental list of necessities. The address of the women's shelter burns in her memory. She didn't dare write it down. Daniel's sleeping form makes her freeze in the doorway, but his breathing remains deep and regular. The house feels different in these small hours, less like a prison and more like a tomb she's leaving behind. Emily moves through shadows she knows by heart, each step carrying them closer to freedom. The night air hits her face like a blessing as she straps her son into his car seat. He stirs but doesn't wake, used to late-night drives when nothing else would soothe his colic. Emily's hands shake as she turns the key, but the luxury SUV's engine purrs to life with barely a whisper. The gates open silently. She'd disabled the notification system earlier, another small act of rebellion she'd been practicing for weeks. As they pass through, Emily forces herself not to look back at the mansion's dark bulk. Looking back is a luxury she can't afford. Streets blur past as she navigates through neighborhoods growing progressively less manicured. Her son sleeps peacefully in his car seat, unaware that every mile carries them further from the only home he's known. Emily's knuckles whiten on the steering wheel as she checks the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Daniel's car appearing like a nightmare. The women's shelter occupies an unmarked building in a quiet neighborhood. Security cameras track Emily's approach, and the door opens before she can knock. A woman with kind eyes and steel gray hair ushers them inside. I'm Lisa Moore, she says, helping Emily with the baby carrier. You're safe now, both of you. The words unlock something in Emily's chest. She sinks into a nearby chair, her son still sleeping against her shoulder as the first tears begin to fall. Lisa's hand on her arm is gentle but firm, an anchor in the storm of emotion. He'll find us, Emily whispers, the reality of what she's done finally hitting her. He has resources, connections, and we have experience, Lisa interrupts quietly. Rest now. Tomorrow we'll start working on keeping you both safe. Emily follows Lisa down a narrow hallway to a small room with 2 beds. The furnishings are simple, the walls institutional beige, but Emily has never seen anything more beautiful than this humble space where she can breathe without permission. Back at the mansion, Daniel's phone chimes with the security system's delayed alert. He wakes to an empty bed and a growing fury that will soon set resources in motion, hunting them with all the considerable power at his disposal. But for now, in this borrowed room with its narrow bed, Emily holds her sleeping son and allows herself to feel the full weight of her choices. The path ahead terrifies her, but not as much as the thought of returning to that beautiful prison. She has broken the spell of Daniel's control, taken the first step toward freedom. Tomorrow will bring challenges she can barely imagine. But tonight, Emily Carter rests in the knowledge that she's finally strong enough to fight for the future her son deserves. Sleep comes slowly, but when it does, she dreams of blank canvases waiting to be filled with new possibilities. Fluorescent lights hum overhead as Emily clutches her sleeping son to her chest. The women's shelter corridor stretches before her, institutional beige walls a stark contrast to the marble and mahogany she left behind. Her arms ache from carrying him, but she can't bring herself to set him down. Not yet. I'm Lisa Moore. The woman beside her speaks in low, measured tones. Steel gray hair frames a face etched with laugh lines and something harder, wisdom earned through years of witnessing stories like Emily's. Let's get you two settled. Emily follows Lisa down the hallway, her designer flats silent against worn linoleum. Each step carries her further from the mansion's suffocating perfection, but Daniel's presence lingers like a shadow at her heels. Her son stirs against her shoulder, and she tightens her grip. Here we are. Lisa pushes open a door to reveal a small room with two narrow beds. The furnishings are sparse, a dresser with peeling veneer, a nightstand topped with a plastic lamp. But the air feels different here, lighter somehow, despite the weight pressing against her ribs. The bathroom is shared, but there's a lock on both sides. Lisa's words carry the weight of experience. Security cameras cover all entrances, and we have staff on site 24/7. Emily nods, though the words barely penetrate the fog of exhaustion and fear clouding her mind. She sinks onto the bed's thin mattress, her son still cradled against her. The springs creak beneath them. Such a small sound, yet it echoes like thunder after years of carefully modulated silence. You're safe here, Lisa says, and something in her tone makes Emily look up. There's no pity in the older woman's eyes, only steady recognition. Both of you. The words crack something open in Emily's chest. Tears spill down her cheeks before she can stop them, hot and messy. She hasn't cried like this in years. Daniel hates displays of emotion, calls them manipulative. But here in this stark room with its humming fluorescent light, Emily lets herself break apart. Lisa's hand on her shoulder is warm, anchoring. She doesn't offer empty platitudes or try to stem the flow of tears. She simply stays, a quiet presence until Emily's breathing steadies. Try to rest, Lisa says finally. Tomorrow we'll start working on keeping you both safe. The door clicks shut behind her, leaving Emily alone with her sleeping son and the magnitude of what she's done. She lays him gently on the bed, creating a barrier of pillows to keep him from rolling. His face in sleep still holds that perfect baby softness, untouched by the chaos around him. What if she's made a terrible mistake? The thought claws at her throat. Daniel will be furious when he discovers them gone. He'll use every resource at his disposal to find them, to punish her for this defiance. The weight of his wealth and connections presses down on her, threatening to crush this fragile bubble of freedom. But as she watches her son's peaceful breathing, another thought surfaces. What if she hadn't left? The image of him growing up in that beautiful prison, learning to measure love in terms of compliance and control, makes her physically ill. No. Whatever comes next, she couldn't let that be his future. Sleep eludes her. Emily lies rigid on the narrow bed, every sound magnified in the unfamiliar space. Footsteps in the hallway make her pulse spike until she recognizes the steady rhythm of security patrols. A door closes somewhere, followed by muffled voices. A child cries briefly before being soothed. Her mind spins with remembered threats, Daniel's voice smooth as silk, even in anger. If you ever think of leaving, he'd said just days ago, remember that I'll have sole custody before you reach the city limits. No judge will side with an unstable mother who abandons her child. The memory sends ice through her veins. He's right. What judge would choose her over him? Daniel Carter, self-made millionaire, pillar of the community. He'll paint her as unstable, unfit. The thought of losing her son makes her chest constrict until breathing becomes a conscious effort. Miles away, in their carefully curated mansion, Daniel paces the marble floors of their bedroom. The security system's delayed alert pulses on his phone, each notification drilling into his skull. Empty bed, empty nursery, empty garage where Emily's SUV should be. Find them. His voice carries that deadly calm that makes even his board members flinch. The private investigator on the other end of the line listens as Daniel outlines Emily's habits, her possible destinations. Use whatever resources necessary. I want them found tonight. Morning arrives with brutal fluorescent clarity. Emily's eyes feel gritty from lack of sleep, but adrenaline keeps her moving. Her son fusses through his morning bottle, picking up on her tension despite her attempts to project calm. A knock at the door makes her jump, but it's only Lisa with coffee and a paper cup of applesauce. Think you can eat something? She sets the offerings on the nightstand. We need to talk about next steps when you're ready. Emily's hand shakes as she reaches for the coffee. Next steps. The words feel impossible, like trying to plan a route through quicksand. But Lisa's steady presence grounds her, makes the impossible seem manageable. There's someone I'd like you to meet, Lisa says, pulling up a chair. Anna Reed. She's a family law attorney who specializes in cases like yours. Fear closes Emily's throat. An attorney means making this real, putting words to years of careful degradation. But her son's weight in her arms reminds her why she can't afford to hesitate. Okay, she whispers, and the single word feels like the first true breath she's taken in years. Anna Reed arrives that afternoon, her sensible suit and no-nonsense demeanor a sharp contrast to the shelter's institutional setting. She listens as Emily stumbles through her story, making notes in precise handwriting. Control of finances? Anna's pen pauses. Everything. Emily's voice catches. He tracks every purchase, questions anything he doesn't approve of, says it's to protect our family's security. And your son's care? I'm not allowed to make decisions without consulting him. He hired the nanny, set the schedule, said I was too emotional to handle it properly. Each admission feels like pulling thorns from her flesh, leaving her raw and exposed. But Anna's focus never wavers, her questions cutting through Emily's shame with professional precision. These patterns matter, Anna says, closing her notebook. What you're describing is a clear pattern of coercive control. We can build a case for custody, but we need to move quickly. Daniel will likely file. A knock interrupts them. Lisa enters, her expression tight. We need to move you, she says without preamble. Daniel's investigators have been spotted in the area. The words send ice through Emily's veins. She clutches her son closer, his warm weight the only thing keeping her from flying apart. How did they? It doesn't matter, Lisa cuts in gently. We have protocols for this. Pack what you need. There's a car waiting. Emily moves on autopilot, shoving clothes and diapers into her bag while Anna and Lisa confer in low voices. The reality of Daniel's reach hits her with fresh force. Even here in this supposed sanctuary, his influence casts its shadow. The shelter's back exit opens onto a narrow alley. A nondescript sedan idles there, its driver a woman Emily recognizes from the shelter's night staff. She slides into the back seat, her son secure in his car seat, and forces herself not to look back. As they pull away, Emily catches a glimpse of two men in suits walking past the shelter's front entrance. The sight sends her heart racing, but the car turns a corner, and they disappear from view. She releases a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The new location is smaller, Lisa says from the front passenger seat, but more secure. And Anna will meet us there tomorrow to continue building your case. Emily nods, though fear still claws at her throat. They drive through unfamiliar streets as the sun sets, each mile carrying them further from Daniel's immediate reach. But his voice echoes in her mind, smooth and reasonable. You can't hide forever, darling. You know that, don't you? She looks at her sleeping son, his face peaceful in the gathering dusk. No, she can't hide forever. But she can fight. The thought settles in her chest like a stone, heavy with promise, or perhaps with threat. The new shelter emerges from the twilight, its windows warm with light. Emily steps out of the car on shaking legs, her son still sleeping against her shoulder. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, legal battles, custody fights, the full force of Daniel's fury. But tonight, in this moment between day and dusk, Emily allows herself to feel the weight of her choice. It settles in her bones like frost, beautiful and dangerous and absolutely necessary. When Lisa leads them inside, Emily follows with steady steps. The door closes behind them with a soft click, another barrier between her son and the gilded cage they left behind. It's not much, not yet, but it's a beginning. And for now, that has to be enough. The next morning dawns gray and humid. Anna Reed returns, her briefcase heavy with preliminary paperwork. They meet in a small office, the walls thin enough that Emily can hear children playing somewhere down the hall. "I need you to understand something," Anna says, spreading documents across the desk. "Proving emotional abuse isn't like physical abuse. There are rarely visible scars, no photographs to present as evidence." She meets Emily's gaze directly. "That doesn't make it any less real." Emily's hands twist in her lap. "But how do we prove it? He was always so careful. Everything he did looked reasonable from the outside." "That's exactly what makes these cases challenging." Anna's pen taps against her legal pad. "We need to document patterns, every instance of control, every threat, every time he undermined your autonomy, and we need witnesses." The request sends Emily's mind spinning. Witnesses? The staff at the mansion had been loyal to Daniel, their silence bought with generous salaries and ironclad NDAs. She'd been so isolated, every potential support system carefully pruned away. "I have recordings," she says finally. "On my phone. Sometimes when he'd start in on me, I'd..." She trails off, shame burning in her throat. Anna leans forward. "That's good. That could be very helpful. What else?" But before Emily can answer, a knock interrupts them. Lisa enters, her expression grim. "We have a situation." The situation arrives in the form of a cease and desist letter, delivered by courier to the shelter's front desk. Daniel's legal team demands information about Emily's whereabouts, threatening action against the shelter for aiding in the unlawful removal of a minor child. Emily reads the letter with trembling hands, Daniel's influence reaching through the formal legal language. Each word drips with the same smooth menace she remembers from their last conversation. "He's trying to intimidate us," Anna says, taking the letter. "Standard tactics. The shelter's protected by confidentiality laws. He knows that." But Emily sees the worry in Lisa's eyes, the subtle tightening around her mouth. Daniel's resources are vast, his determination to maintain control absolute. How long before he finds a way around those laws? A noise in the hallway makes Emily freeze. But it's not Daniel's investigators or his legal team. It's James, his former driver, visiting someone at the shelter. Their eyes meet through the office doorway, recognition sparking between them. James hesitates, then steps into the office. "Mrs. Carter?" His voice carries the same careful deference she remembers, but something else too. Concern, maybe even guilt. "James." Emily's heart pounds. Here stands someone who witnessed years of Daniel's careful degradation, who drove her to endless charity functions where Daniel would critique her every word and gesture on the ride home. "I've been wanting to talk to you," he says, glancing at Anna. "About Mr. Carter, about what I saw." Hope flares in Emily's chest, bright and dangerous. But before she can respond, Lisa returns with more news. Daniel has launched a social media campaign painting Emily as unstable, unfit, a woman who abandoned her family in a fit of paranoid delusion. The accusations splash across Emily's phone screen in carefully crafted posts from concerned friends. Each one chips away at her credibility, her sanity, her right to mother her own child. "He's trying to control the narrative," Anna says, her voice hard. "But this kind of aggressive tactics can backfire in court. It shows a pattern of behavior." Emily stares at the posts, at the comments from people who'd smiled to her face at Daniel's parties. The weight of it threatens to crush her until she hears her son's laugh from the shelter's daycare down the hall. The sound cuts through her paralysis. She looks up at James, still hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "Will you help us? Will you testify to what you saw?" James straightens, something like relief crossing his face. "Yes, ma'am. It's time someone told the truth about Mr. Carter." Emily meets Anna's eyes, sees the spark of triumph there. It's not much, a single witness, some poor quality recordings, the paper trail of Daniel's own vicious response to her leaving. But it's a start. She thinks of her son, of the future waiting beyond Daniel's reach. The path ahead still terrifies her, but for the first time she can see its ending. not in defeat or surrender, but in freedom. Lisa brings her coffee, the mug warm between her palms. Outside, rain begins to fall, drumming against the shelter's windows. Emily takes a sip, letting the bitter warmth ground her in this moment. Tomorrow will bring more battles, more of Daniel's attempts to regain control. But today, in this small office with its thin walls and children's laughter down the hall, Emily chooses to believe in possibility. The rain falls harder, washing away the last traces of summer heat. Emily wraps her hands around the coffee mug and begins to tell her story, every painful detail a stone in the foundation of her new life. Legal documents blur before Emily's eyes as she sits cross-legged on her narrow shelter bed, the mounting stack of papers a testament to the impossible mountain she's trying to climb. A quick glance at her phone, no missed calls from Anna, her lawyer. The court date looms just weeks away, each passing day adding another layer of anxiety to her already frayed nerves. Her son babbles from his playpen, the sound both comfort and reminder of everything at stake. The legal fees alone are draining what little savings she managed to squirrel away during her marriage. Daniel's latest move, spreading rumors about her mental stability among their former social circle, has cut off potential support from people she once considered friends. Mama! Her son's voice pulls her from the spiral of worry. He holds up a stuffed elephant, beaming with pride at this simple act of sharing. Emily forces herself to smile, though the expression feels brittle on her face. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," she manages, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The elephant was a gift from Lisa Moore, who seems to have an endless supply of small kindnesses tucked away for moments when hope feels distant. Night settles over the shelter, and Emily rocks her son to sleep, his warm weight against her chest both anchor and burden. The rhythm of the rocking chair matches her racing thoughts. Is she strong enough for this fight? Can she really win against Daniel's seemingly endless resources? His influence extends so far, reaches so deep into their community. "You're doing better than you think," Lisa's voice cuts through her thoughts. The shelter coordinator stands in the doorway, her practical shoes silent on the worn carpet. "I've seen that look before, the one that says you're wondering if it's worth the fight." Emily shifts her sleeping son to a more comfortable position. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, putting him through all this uncertainty when Daniel could give him everything." "Except freedom," Lisa interrupts gently. "Except the chance to grow up seeing his mother whole and strong." Before Emily can respond, footsteps in the hallway announce another visitor. Margaret Ellis sweeps in like a breath of fresh air, her silver hair elegantly styled and her clothes speaking of quiet wealth. But it's her eyes that draw Emily's attention, sharp, kind, and carrying the weight of understanding that can only come from shared experience. "I brought tea," Margaret announces, producing a thermos from her designer bag, "and stories if you're willing to hear them." Lisa excuses herself with a knowing smile, leaving Emily alone with this woman who represents everything she once had and everything she hopes to become. Margaret pours tea into paper cups, the aromatic steam filling the small room. "10 years ago, I was you," Margaret begins without preamble. Different mansion, different husband, same cage. She sips her tea, giving Emily time to absorb her words. "Richard was a master of making everything look perfect from the outside. He never left bruises where anyone could see them." Emily's hands tighten around her cup. "Daniel never hit me. Sometimes I wonder if that makes me weak for leaving." "Stop." Margaret's voice carries the authority of hard-won wisdom. "Abuse doesn't need bruises to break you. Richard broke my spirit long before he ever raised a hand to me." She sets down her cup, leaning forward. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to ask you something important. What will you do when this is over?" The question catches Emily off guard. She's been so focused on survival, on the immediate battles, that thinking beyond them feels almost dangerous. I haven't really thought about it." "Then start thinking." Margaret's smile softens her words. "Because you will win this fight, Emily, and when you do, you'll need something to move toward, not just something to run from." Emily glances at her sleeping son, then at the sketchbook peeking from beneath her pillow. "I used to paint. Before Daniel convinced me it was just a hobby." "Tell me more." Margaret encourages, and suddenly words pour from Emily like water from a broken dam. She describes her dreams of art school, the gallery showings her professors predicted, the way color and canvas once made her feel alive. That night, after Margaret leaves, Emily pulls out her sketchbook. Her hands move across the paper with growing confidence as she draws what she sees in her mind, a warm, welcoming space filled with art and light. Tables where women gather to share stories and strength, a counter where fresh coffee and hope are served in equal measure. The sketch takes shape, a cafe, but more than that, a sanctuary, a place where survivors like her could find community and purpose. For the first time in months, excitement flutters in her chest, a feeling so foreign she almost doesn't recognize it. She adds details to the drawing: worn but comfortable chairs, walls lined with local artists' work, a small play area for children. In one corner, she sketches an easel, imagining art classes where women could rediscover their own creative voices. Margaret's words echo in her mind. What will you do when this is over? The answer unfolds on the page before her, each pencil stroke a step toward a future she's finally allowing herself to imagine. The next morning brings a meeting with Anna Reed that changes everything. Emily arrives at the lawyer's office, clutching her ever-present travel mug of coffee, her son contentedly playing with toys in the corner of Anna's office. The familiar space, with its organized chaos of legal files and family photos, has become a strange sort of comfort over the past months. James called. Anna begins without preamble, her usual professional demeanor brightened by barely contained excitement. He's officially agreed to testify. Emily's coffee cup freezes halfway to her lips. James, Daniel's former driver, had witnessed years of their marriage from the front seat of their luxury cars. He'd seen the careful way Daniel would switch from charming businessman to controlling husband the moment the privacy divider went up. He's willing to speak about specific incidents, Anna continues, shuffling through her notes. The night of the Morrison Charity Gala, when Daniel berated you for talking to his competitors' wives. The business dinner where he dismissed your market analysis in front of the board members. And, she pauses, meeting Emily's eyes, the time he threatened to leave you penniless if you ever embarrassed him again. Emily remembers that night with crystal clarity. The way Daniel's whispered threats had fogged the car window, how James's eyes in the rearview mirror had held a mixture of concern and helplessness. Will it be enough? Combined with what else we've uncovered? Anna's smile turns predatory. She pulls out a thick folder, spreading documents across her desk. Emily, look at these. Financial statements fan out before her, each page filled with numbers that make Emily's head swim. But even she can recognize the significance of what she's seeing. Offshore accounts, hidden assets, money moved through shell companies with the kind of precision that speaks of long-term planning. He's been hiding marital assets, Anna explains, highlighting key figures. Significant ones. This doesn't just help your case for a fair settlement, it throws serious doubt on every financial declaration he's made to the court. Emily stares at the documents, her artist's eye catching patterns in the numbers that speak of deliberate deception. All those years of Daniel insisting she leave the finances to him, of making her feel foolish for questioning their accounts, it had all been carefully orchestrated concealment. How did you find this? Let's just say Daniel isn't the only one with connections in the financial sector. Anna gathers the documents with practiced efficiency. More importantly, this changes the game. His perfect facade is cracking Emily. The court will see him for what he is, a man who not only emotionally abused his wife, but also committed financial fraud to maintain control. The revelation settles over Emily like a warm blanket, chasing away the constant chill of uncertainty she's carried since leaving. She looks at her son, happily stacking blocks in his corner of the office, and feels something shift in her chest. The mountain before her doesn't seem quite so insurmountable anymore. She thinks of Lisa's steady support at the shelter, of Margaret's quiet wisdom and encouragement, of James finding the courage to stand up to his former employer. Even Anna, with her fierce determination and refusal to be intimidated by Daniel's legal team, has become more than just her attorney. I'm not alone in this, Emily says softly, the realization hitting her with unexpected force. You never were. Anna's voice carries a gentleness usually hidden beneath her professional demeanor. And that's exactly what terrifies Daniel. He worked so hard to isolate you, to make you believe you had no one. But look around, Emily. Look at all the people willing to stand beside you. The next day, Daniel's lawyers schedule an emergency meeting. They arrive at Anna's office with their usual air of expensive cologne and thinly veiled condescension, armed with a settlement offer that makes Emily's stomach turn. The terms are laid out in precise legal language: a modest financial settlement that amounts to pocket change for Daniel, supervised visitation with their son, and a non-disclosure agreement that would effectively silence Emily about everything she's endured. It's a reasonable offer, Daniel's lead attorney suggests, his tone suggesting she should be grateful. Given the circumstances, Mrs. Carter might want to consider no. The word comes out stronger than Emily expected, surprising even herself. She looks at Anna, drawing strength from her lawyer's approving nod. I won't accept these terms. Mrs. Carter, another lawyer begins. Mr. Carter is being quite generous. Generous? Emily feels something crack inside her, but it's not her resolve. It's the shell of fear she's carried for so long. Like he was generous in hiding our marital assets, or generous in threatening to destroy me if I ever left. The lawyers exchange glances, their practiced composure slipping just enough to confirm they hadn't expected this level of resistance. Emily stands, gathering her courage around her like armor. I won't accept anything less than fair custody and an equitable division of assets, she states, her voice steady. All of the assets, including those your client has hidden offshore. The meeting ends shortly after, leaving Emily alone with Anna in the sudden quiet of the office. Her hands shake as she pulls out her sketchbook, her constant companion these days, and opens it to her cafe drawings. I know what I want to do, she tells Anna, showing her the sketches. When this is over, I mean. Margaret, she's been helping me develop a business plan. Anna studies the drawings with genuine interest. A cafe? More than that. Emily turns the pages, revealing more detailed sketches. A space for women like me, somewhere they can feel safe, find community. I want to use my art to create something meaningful, something that helps others find their voice. She traces the lines of her drawings, each stroke representing a piece of the future she's finally brave enough to claim. Daniel always said my art was just a hobby, something to keep me occupied between his dinner parties and charity events. But it's more than that. It's who I am, who I've always been. The setting sun paints Anna's office in shades of gold, and Emily feels the weight of the day's decisions settle into something like peace. She has refused to be bought off, chosen to fight not just for survival, but for the chance to thrive. Her son's soft snores from his travel crib remind her of everything at stake, but for the first time, the sound fills her with determination rather than fear. She adds another detail to her cafe sketch, a small garden in the back, where healing can take root and grow alongside herbs and flowers. Tomorrow will bring more battles, more legal maneuvers, more attempts by Daniel to regain control. But tonight, Emily Carter plans for a future that extends beyond courtroom victories, beyond mere escape. She plans for a life rebuilt on her own terms, painted in colors of her own choosing. The crack in her world that started with her midnight flight from Daniel's mansion has widened into a door, and through it, she can finally see the path to becoming whole again. Emily's reflection wavers in the shelter bathroom mirror as she adjusts her blazer, a Goodwill find that Anna helped her select for court. The fabric feels stiff against her skin, nothing like the silk blend suits Daniel used to choose for her, but there's something empowering about its utilitarian lines. She smooths her hair back, securing it with steady hands that belie the tremor in her chest. Remember, Anna's voice drifts from the doorway, the judge needs to see your strength, not just hear about it. The lawyer steps into the small space, her presence filling it with quiet confidence. Show them the mother who was brave enough to leave everything behind to protect her son. Emily meets her own gaze in the mirror. The woman staring back looks older than she remembers, shadows under her eyes telling stories of sleepless nights and endless worry. But there's something else there too, a steel that wasn't present in the perfectly curated photos that still hang in Daniel's mansion. We've been over the questions. Lisa adds from behind Anna, her gray hair catching the fluorescent light. You know your truth, Emily. That's your power. The words settle into Emily's bones as she turns from the mirror. Her hands find the familiar weight of her sketchbook, retrieved from its hiding place during a supervised visit to collect essential documents. The pages fall open to recent drawings, quick studies done in the shelter's common room during late nights when sleep proved elusive. I've been thinking, Emily says, running her fingers along the edge of a particular sketch. These drawings, they're not just art, they're evidence, aren't they? Of what I was feeling, what I was going through. Anna steps closer, examining the image of a bird breaking free from an ornate cage. The lines are sharp, desperate, charcoal smudges suggesting movement and urgency. This is powerful, she says softly. It humanizes your experience in a way statistics and testimony can't always achieve. Emily flips through more pages, her son sleeping peacefully in the shelter's spare crib, a self-portrait drawn in fragments like broken glass, the mansion's facade rendered as a mausoleum. Each image captures a moment of her journey, raw and undeniable. We can present selected pieces, Anna continues, her legal mind already working through the strategy. Frame them as contemporaneous documentation of your emotional state. It's unconventional, but that might work in our favor. The night before court, Emily sits cross-legged on her narrow shelter bed, her son asleep in the crib beside her. The sketchbook lies open in her lap, its pages spread with the images she's chosen to share. Each one feels like a piece of armor being fitted into place, the bird breaking free, the fragmented self-portrait, a recent drawing of her son reaching towards sunshine streaming through barred windows. Her fingers trace the lines of the latest sketch, still fresh enough that charcoal dusts her fingertips. It shows a woman standing straight-backed before a towering shadow, her stance protective as she shields a small figure behind her. The image trembles slightly under her touch, but Emily's hand steadies as her son makes a soft sound in his sleep. We're going to be okay, she whispers, both to him and herself. The words hold more certainty than they did months ago when she first fled into the night. She closes the sketchbook and sets it beside her court outfit, ready for tomorrow's battle. But the courthouse proves to be a fortress of unexpected betrayals. Emily watches helplessly as Daniel's legal team systematically dismantles her carefully gathered evidence. Their lead attorney, a woman whose pearls probably cost more than Emily's entire wardrobe, approaches the bench with practiced grace. Your Honor, we move to exclude the audio recordings presented by Mrs. Carter, she says, her voice carrying just the right note of reasonable concern. Not only were these recordings obtained without proper consent, but their authenticity is questionable at best. Emily's hands clench in her lap as the lawyer continues, methodically highlighting technical issues with the recordings, background noise that obscures key moments, unclear context, the possibility of selective editing. Each point lands like a physical blow. Furthermore, the lawyer adds, these recordings, even if authenticated, present an incomplete and potentially manipulated narrative. Mrs. Carter's decision to secretly record her husband speaks to a pattern of calculated behavior that raises serious concerns about her credibility. Anna rises to object, but the damage is already spreading like ink in water. The judge's expression has shifted from neutral to troubled as he reviews the technical analysis provided by Daniel's team. The recordings will be excluded, he announces, the words falling heavy in the courtroom. They fail to meet the standard for admissible evidence. Emily feels the loss like a physical blow, but forces herself to maintain the composed expression Anna drilled into her during their preparation sessions. Across the courtroom, Daniel sits perfectly still, his expensive suit and carefully neutral expression a masterclass in controlled presentation. Only Emily recognizes the slight upturn of his mouth for what it is. The same expression he wore when correcting her wine pronunciation at dinner parties or questioning her household management decisions. His lawyers pivot smoothly from their victory, turning their attention to Emily's sketchbook with the same ruthless efficiency. While Mrs. Carter's artwork is certainly emotive, the pearl-wearing attorney says, making the words sound like a criticism, it represents nothing more than subjective interpretations. These drawings cannot be considered evidence of any specific wrongdoing by our client. The sketches that felt so powerful in the shelter's fluorescent lighting now seem small and vulnerable under the courthouse's harsh scrutiny. Emily watches as Daniel's team methodically reframes each image. The bird in the cage becomes melodramatic self-pity, the fragmented self-portrait evidence of instability rather than trauma. Is this the work of a stable mother? The lawyer asks, holding up the drawing of the mansion mausoleum. Or does it suggest someone prone to dark fantasies and exaggeration? The cross-examination that follows tests every ounce of composure Emily has cultivated. Daniel's lawyer circles like a shark scenting blood, her questions designed to expose every uncertainty, every moment of doubt. You left in the middle of the night, she states, taking a young child from his home without any attempt at mediation or legal intervention. How do you justify such a reckless action? Emily forces herself to meet the lawyer's gaze. I left because, yes or no, Mrs. Carter. Did you remove your son from his home without legal authorization? I had to protect. Your Honor, the lawyer interrupts smoothly, please direct the witness to answer the question as asked. Yes, Emily whispers, the single syllable tasting like defeat. And this impulsive departure, the lawyer continues, doesn't it demonstrate a concerning pattern of unstable decision-making? The humiliation burns hot under Emily's skin as the questions continue, each one designed to paint her actions as dangerous and irrational, rather than desperate and brave. By the time Anna manages to redirect, Emily feels scraped raw, her carefully constructed composure cracking at the edges. Later, in the courthouse waiting room, Emily sits alone with her son's favorite blanket clutched in her hands. The soft blue fabric still carries a trace of baby shampoo and shelter laundry detergent, so different from the expensive French brand Daniel insisted on. The morning's defeats play on repeat in her mind. The excluded recordings, her discredited artwork, the way Daniel's lawyer twisted every action into evidence of instability. The weight of it all presses down until Emily finds herself considering options she'd promised herself were unthinkable. Daniel's latest settlement offer sits in her bag, the paper heavy with promises and conditions. Supervised visitation, a return to the mansion, a substantial monthly allowance, all contingent on her dropping the abuse allegations and submitting to family counseling with a therapist of Daniel's choosing. Just until we rebuild trust, Daniel had murmured during their last supervised interaction, his voice carrying that familiar note of reasonable concern that used to make her doubt her own judgment. Think of what's best for our son. Now, sitting in the sterile courthouse waiting room, Emily allows herself to imagine accepting. No more public humiliation, no more watching her every word and gesture being twisted into weapons against her. She could have her old life back, the comfort, the security, the carefully maintained illusion of perfect family harmony. The thought makes her physically ill, but isn't a gilded cage better than this constant battle that she might lose anyway? Anna's voice echoes in her memory. Settling means living with his version of events. Are you ready to teach your son that his father's behavior was acceptable? But the next morning brings an unexpected shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. James enters through the heavy doors, his uniform pressed but somehow more worn than it appeared during his years as Daniel's driver. He takes the stand with quiet dignity, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. Mr. Harrison, Anna begins, could you describe the incident you witnessed on March 15th? James's voice carries clearly through the courtroom. Mr. Carter was angry about a dinner party Mrs. Carter had hosted. He followed her into the garage, saying she'd embarrassed him in front of his colleagues. When she tried to explain that one of the guests had requested a last-minute menu change, he grabbed her arm and told her that her incompetence was becoming a liability. Emily watches Daniel's perfect posture stiffen slightly as James continues, detailing incident after incident with the precise memory of someone accustomed to observing without being observed. Each account lands with the weight of truth. The casual cruelty, the calculated humiliation, the way Daniel's control extended to every aspect of Emily's life. There was a system to it, James explains, his steady gaze never wavering. Mr. Carter would praise Mrs. Carter in public, show her off at events, but in private. He pauses, adjusting his tie. In private, he'd list every small mistake, every perceived failure. The wrong wine with dinner, a conversation that went too long with the wrong guest, the baby crying during an important phone call. The courtroom stays silent as James describes the pattern of isolation, how Daniel gradually dismissed the household staff members who showed Emily kindness, how he monitored her phone calls under the guise of protecting their privacy, how he turned every independent decision into evidence of her poor judgment. The night she left, James continues, Mr. Carter had been especially angry about a charity event where Mrs. Carter had spoken to a gallery owner about possibly displaying some artwork. I heard him tell her that she was embarrassing him with her childish hobby. When she tried to explain that the gallery owner had approached her, Mr. Carter threw his glass against the wall. The baby started crying, and Mrs. Carter... James's voice softens. She didn't even flinch. She just went upstairs to comfort her son. That's when I knew she'd finally reached her breaking point. Mrs. Carter would often sit in the garden after these incidents, James adds, his voice softening. Sometimes I'd hear her crying while I washed the cars, but in the morning, she'd always have that same brave smile, especially when her son was around. The testimony continues, James's steady voice illuminating the shadows of Emily's former life, his position as a long-term employee, his lack of personal stake in the outcome, and his detailed observations begin to shift the courtroom's energy. Even Daniel's lawyers seem less aggressive in their cross-examination, perhaps sensing that attacking James's credibility would only reinforce his authenticity. During the afternoon recess, Emily finds herself in the waiting area, watching her son stack colorful blocks provided by the courthouse child care coordinator. His small hands move with determined focus, each block placed with the serious concentration of a master architect. The sight of him, so innocent and trusting, floods Emily with a renewed sense of purpose. The blocks tumble, and her son laughs, a pure, joyous sound that cuts through the courthouse's somber atmosphere. He looks up at Emily with complete faith, secure in the knowledge that his mother will help him rebuild his fallen tower. The trust in his eyes makes every humiliation, every setback, every moment of doubt worth enduring. Emily kneels beside him, helping to gather the scattered blocks. Each piece they collect becomes a silent promise to fight through every setback, to weather every storm of Daniel's making, to build something new and strong from the ruins of her old life. Her son hands her a red block, and Emily adds it to their growing foundation, her determination solidifying with each piece. Again, he says, and Emily smiles, hearing in that simple word all the resilience and hope she needs to face whatever challenges await in the courtroom. Together, they begin to build anew, their small corner of the waiting area transformed into a workshop of possibility. The next session looms, but Emily faces it with strengthened resolve. James's testimony has carved a path through Daniel's carefully constructed narrative, and Emily intends to follow it to freedom. She helps her son place the final block atop their tower, marking the moment in her mind as another small victory in their journey toward a life rebuilt on their own terms. Emily's fingers trace the edges of her sketch pad as moonlight filters through the shelter's window. Her son sleeps peacefully in the small bed beside her, his chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The clock on the wall ticks past midnight, marking the beginning of the day that will determine their future. She flips through her sketches, evidence of her journey from trapped wife to fighting mother. The latest drawing catches her eye. A bird breaking free from an ornate cage, its wings spread wide against a stormy sky. The metaphor feels almost too obvious, but the truth of it resonates in her bones. A soft knock interrupts her thoughts. Lisa Moore stands in the doorway, her silver hair gleaming in the dim light. Can't sleep? Emily shakes her head. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face, the way he looks at me in court, like I'm property that's been stolen. Lisa settles into the room's only chair, her presence steady and grounding. You're not his property, Emily. Tomorrow, you get to tell your story, the whole truth in your own words. The weight of tomorrow's testimony presses against Emily's chest. She's rehearsed the words countless times with Anna, but speaking them in front of Daniel, laying bare the years of careful manipulation and control, the thought makes her hands tremble. What if it's not enough? The question escapes before she can stop it. Then we keep fighting, Lisa says simply. But Emily, you've already won the most important battle. You're free. Whatever happens tomorrow, he can't take that away from you. Dawn brings Anna Reed to the shelter, her briefcase bulging with documents. They gather in the small conference room where the attorney spreads their evidence across the scratched wooden table. Remember, Anna says, tapping James's written testimony, his account corroborates everything. The incident at the Richardson dinner, the threats about custody, the hidden accounts, it's all here. She fixes Emily with a steady gaze. But your testimony is what matters most. The judge needs to hear your voice, not just the evidence. Emily nods, her throat tight. What if I freeze up? What if? Then you look at me, Lisa interrupts, squeezing Emily's hand. Or look at this. She touches the baby blanket peeking from Emily's bag. Remember why you're fighting. Like the courthouse looms against the morning sky, its stone facade cold and imposing. Camera flashes explode as Emily climbs the steps, Anna at her side like a shield. Reporters shout questions about the high-profile custody battle, about Daniel Carter's claims of parental kidnapping. Head high, Anna murmurs. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Emily clutches her son's blanket in her bag, drawing strength from its familiar softness. The texture grounds her, reminds her of quiet nights singing lullabies of the fierce love that drove her to run. Inside, the courtroom buzzes with whispered conversations. Emily's steps falter as she spots Daniel, impeccable in a tailored suit. He sits beside his lawyers, his posture radiating controlled anger. Their eyes meet across the room, and Emily feels the old urge to shrink, to apologize, to do anything to ease that simmering rage. But something has changed. The fear is still there, but it no longer paralyzes her. Instead, it fuels her resolve. She holds his gaze for one steady moment before taking her seat, spine straight, chin lifted. The judge enters, and Emily rises with the rest of the courtroom. As everyone settles back into their seats, she catches a glimpse of James in the back row. The former driver offers a slight nod, and Emily feels a surge of gratitude for his courage in testifying. Anna stands to call their first witness, and Emily's heart pounds against her ribs. This is it, the moment to speak her truth, to fight for her son's future. She takes a deep breath and steps toward the witness stand, leaving behind the silence that has protected her abuser for far too long. Please state your name for the record. Emily leans toward the microphone, her voice clear and steady. Emily Ann Carter. The familiar questions begin, establishing the timeline of her marriage to Daniel. Emily keeps her answers precise, just as she and Anna practiced. But when they reach the heart of her testimony, the years of subtle degradation, of measured control, something shifts in her voice. It started so gradually, she says, her fingers twisting in her lap. Comments about my art being a hobby, suggestions about how I should dress or speak at his business functions. He made it sound reasonable, like he was helping me fit into his world. She describes the isolation that crept in, the way Daniel's concerns about her friendships led to fewer and fewer social connections. The constant monitoring of her expenses, the subtle threats wrapped in expressions of care. The night I left, Emily continues, glancing at the judge, he told me no court would ever give custody to a mother who abandoned her child. But staying, letting my son grow up learning that love means control, that power means fear, that would have been the real abandonment. Daniel's lawyer stands for cross-examination, his expression shark-like. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you had full access to joint bank accounts? That my client provided you with a life of luxury? Yes, Emily answers, her voice steady. But a gilded cage is still a cage. The questions grow more aggressive, picking apart her decisions, her timing, her methods of escape. Emily feels sweat gathering at her temples, but maintains her composure. She catches Anna's eye, draws strength from her encouraging nod. When James takes the stand, his testimony lands like hammer blows. He describes specific incidents. Daniel's rage when Emily spoke up at business dinners, the late-night arguments he overheard while waiting in the car, the casual cruelty disguised as correction. Mr. Carter told me to report if Mrs. Carter ever went anywhere without his knowledge, James says, his voice firm. Said it was for her own protection, but the way he said it, he shakes his head. I've driven for a lot of wealthy folks. Never saw anything like that. Daniel's lawyers attempt to paint James as a disgruntled ex-employee, but his testimony holds firm. Emily watches Daniel's jaw clench tighter with each word, recognizing the contained fury in his rigid posture. The financial evidence comes next. Records of hidden accounts, of assets carefully concealed from their joint holdings. Anna presents each document methodically, building a picture of calculated control. As the final arguments wrap up, Emily sits with her hands clasped tight in her lap. The judge's expression reveals nothing as she reviews her notes. The courtroom holds its breath. In cases of emotional abuse, the judge begins, we often lack the visible evidence of physical violence. However, the pattern of control and coercion demonstrated here is clear and concerning. Emily's heart pounds so hard she can barely hear the next words. But then, primary custody is awarded to Emily Carter, with supervised visitation rights granted to Daniel Carter pending completion of court-mandated counseling. The rest of the judgment fades into a blur of legal terms and financial settlements. Emily barely registers the substantial sum awarded to her. All she can feel is the lifting of a weight she's carried for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Outside, sunshine breaks through the clouds as reporters surge forward with questions. Emily ignores them, turning instead to hug Anna fiercely. "Thank you," she whispers. "Thank you for believing me." Lisa appears through the crowd, her eyes bright with tears. "You did it, Emily. You really did it." That evening, as the adrenaline fades, Emily sits in the shelter's common room with an unexpected visitor. Margaret Ellis, elegant in her casual clothes, pours them both tea from the shelter's chipped mugs. "I have a proposition for you," Margaret says, stirring honey into her cup. "That little cafe space I own downtown, it's been sitting empty since my last tenant left. And I've been thinking," she pauses, eyes twinkling, "how do you feel about combining coffee with art?" Emily blinks, caught off guard. "I don't know anything about running a cafe." "But you know about creating safe spaces," Margaret counters, "about making beauty from pain, the business side, that I can teach you." She leans forward. "Think about it, a place where women can breathe, can create, can rebuild, just like you're doing." The idea takes root in Emily's mind, sprouting possibilities. She imagines walls lined with artwork from survivors, comfortable corners where mothers can relax while their children play safely. A place of healing disguised as a neighborhood cafe. "I'd need time," Emily says slowly, "to learn, to plan." "Time is something you have now," Margaret reminds her gently, "along with freedom to choose." Months later, Emily stands in her cafe on opening day, watching sunlight stream through the front windows. Local artists, many of them women she met at the shelter, have contributed pieces that transform the walls into a gallery of resilience and hope. The play area she designed occupies one corner, already filled with the sound of children's laughter. Her son toddles among them, secure in this space that represents their new beginning. Lisa arrives with a bouquet of flowers, beaming as she takes in the transformed space. "It's perfect, Emily. Absolutely perfect." Emily moves through the morning in a daze of happiness, greeting customers, accepting congratulations, watching her vision come to life. The cafe fills with a steady stream of visitors, some from the shelter, others just neighborhood folks drawn in by the warmth and art. As the day winds down, a man pauses in front of one of Emily's drawings, the bird breaking free from its cage. "This is powerful," he says, turning to her with genuine interest. "Did you create it?" Emily hesitates, old fears flickering briefly, but they're just echoes now, growing fainter with each passing day. "Yes," she answers, surprising herself with a smile. "It's about transformation." He asks about her technique, and Emily finds herself sharing the story behind the piece. It's a small moment, inconsequential perhaps, but it feels like another step forward on this new path she's creating. Later, after closing Lee, Emily stands in the quiet cafe. The space feels different in the evening light, full of possibilities and peace. Her son sleeps in his carrier, worn out from the excitement of the day. She runs her hand along the counter, still amazed that this is real, this place she's created, this life she's reclaimed. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But for now, in this moment, Emily Carter breathes deeply and feels completely, wonderfully free. Walking home under the streetlights, Emily carries her sleeping son close. The night air feels different than it did all those months ago when she fled into darkness. Now it wraps around her like a promise, like an invitation to keep becoming who she was always meant to be. She doesn't know what tomorrow will bring, but for the first time in years, she's not afraid to find out. The future stretches before her, blank as a canvas, waiting for her to fill it with colors of her own choosing. Thank you so much for watching and listening to our story. Your time and support mean the world to us. If this video resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Your engagement helps us grow and continue sharing meaningful stories. See you in the next video.